The Secrets of Technology is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Technology, where we discuss the technology news that's important to you from a uniquely Catholic point of view. And joining me today on the panel are Father Joseph Sund. Hey, Father.
Good to be with you.
And Victor Lambs. Hey, Victor.
Hi, Dom.
So we're back after a week off. I took my family on vacation. I usually don't announce that ahead of time because I don't want anybody to know that I'm not home.
Yep.
But we're actually going to be taking a couple weeks off again in July, but that's for a different reason. The official StarQuest pilgrimage to Italy will be happening then, so I will be there instead of here. But my kids will be here with my in-laws, so don't come to my house.
Yeah.
But this time, we're talking about this fun topic. Father, you suggested this one, shortwave radio. And here's the little intro I wrote. We're turning the dial back to shortwave radio. You may think it's an outdated tech from a bygone era, but it's alive, global, and accessible. Now, Victor, you brought up an interesting question before we started, which is, are we talking about shortwave radio or amateur radio? And as someone who really doesn't know much about this topic, what's the difference?
Yeah, so it is a question of application and technology, and I am by no means an expert. I have not, been over the AARL handbook in many years. I'm not licensed ham operator, but shortwave radio refers to the frequency. The frequency of the radio waves. Although paradoxically they are longer wavelengths, between 3 and 30. Or I guess it's
megahertz.
They measure them in feet. Yeah, the frequency is between 3 and 30 megahertz. And as such, once they get going, kind of like the lower frequency sounds from your subwoofer, they carry very long distances. With not a lot of energy, relatively speaking. So they are great for, sending, radio signals over long distances, which is why they have been used so effectively in the past for, information, formal broadcasts. I don't want to say commercial because usually they're public interest type transmissions. And while there are amateur radio applications that you can do in the, lower frequency range, a lot of what, we would consider amateur radio, or some of the family radios, or GMRS walkie-talkies that you can buy to talk to your family with, those are much higher frequencies, much shorter wavelengths, somewhere between 100 and 500 megahertz. Is where those operate. So they're, I think they, are clearer signals, but they definitely don't travel as far, and you need more energy to get those signals out there.
Yeah. The history of this goes back pretty far. So the biggest use of it in fighting against totalitarianism, right? So Nazi Germany, Russia, and things like that, people were able to get information to them, faith broadcast to them.
Because the signals travel so far at a relatively low power, you could transmit over cross-international borders at a very long range from Western Europe into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, for instance. And that was a big application. And I wanted to draw out something else that you said there, Victor, because so shortwave radio usually is like a big base station, an entity, usually an institution of some sort, government or other institution, transmitting. And then you have amateur radio, which includes a couple things. One thing with a term people may know, ham radio, which I think what distinguishes ham radio from the family radio frequency, usages is power, if I'm correctly right, because ham radio was stronger power, and therefore you need a license.
Well, it's more the applications, the family radio services and GMRS, which is kind of the same frequencies that family radio uses, but there's less restrictions on the power outputs. Use a very clearly defined, spectrum within the radio band that are reserved for that purpose. Whereas ham radio, you have a much larger range of much larger range of frequencies you can use. They're still carved out of the spectrum, but they're designated for amateur radio use, and they don't follow specific protocols. You can pretty much, I don't want to say pretty much, but you can use those frequencies to transmit audio via radio signals, or even people use them to transmit images or even data,
like digital. Yeah,
and stuff now. So there's much wider you have a lot more of the frequency band that you can use for a much wider range of purposes, rather than being limited to just walkie-talkies within a 5 or so mile radius.
Right. And even with the walkie-talkies, the family band, you're supposed to get a free license. Like you go on the government website. Like if you're in the U.S., like we're going to talk about this from a U.S. perspective, but in the U.S. you need to go on a government website and you fill out a form, and then you've got your license to use those little family band radios. The not the cheap ones, but the ones, the GPRS and GMRS ones that can go a little bit of a distance. I have one of those. After our last discussion about this on this show, I went and got that. But at ham radio, you get a license, you get your own, what's the number, the station number,
the call sign, or the and
that requires taking a test. Like that requires a little bit more, right?
Yeah, that to get licensed for ham, you do need to take a test. You have to be, I don't know if you still have to be sponsored by a current ham radio operator. They may have dropped that, but and I did say GPRS. I don't know why I said that. I think that's probably a work acronym. GMRS is the type of radio. And I think the licensing fees on that are around $35, and the license is good for 10 years.
Right.
But there isn't a test, and they do give you your little 4-digit, or I think mine might be, I think it's 4 or 6. I did it a few years ago. I'll have to look up what my, my radio call sign is, because you're supposed to announce that when you use GMRS, but, even that's fun to listen to sometimes, because you get, people at work talking to each other and stuff. So,
yeah, you hear a lot of them in scouting events, by the way.
Yeah.
A lot of troops talking to each other, cross-talking even. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about both of these, I think, because we'll kind of cover the topic at a high level for a little bit of both. But I just wanted to check with you both, your background, if you guys have any background in this area. Like, I don't really have much of a background in this area. I have a cousin who was a big ham radio guy back when I was, in the 80s when I was a teen. And I remember he had the big antenna in his yard, and he would talk to people, again, pre-internet days. He was talking to people in other countries, that was a big deal. That's about most I knew about it. But Father, do you have any background with this kind of radio?
With shortwave, to be exact. My old man was, if it was a radio and Radio Shack sold it, he collected it. And so, especially around shortwave and CB radios, were kind of his hobby there, but shortwave especially. And so, just grew up sometimes walking in the room and hearing my dad listen to Russian radio where he has no clue what they're saying, but he just thinks it's cool because he can hear it. Right. So,
I forgot about CB radio. That kind of a little bit falls in this area. And my brother's a truck driver, so I've known about CB radio a long time. And that's even changed a bit from the old days. In the old days, you had to have the etiquette was to have a handle, and you had like the lingo 10-4, good buddy. This is Boston Bob, nobody does it anymore. If you do that on the radio now, all the truck drivers will make fun of you. So don't do that.
They don't talk about the county Mounties or the full grown bears at the 19 and
like Convoy by BJ McCall, the old song. I love that song.
That was very much my childhood too. My dad had CB radios in all the cars, and whenever we'd go on trips on the highway, he'd say breaker 19 for a radio check.
Yeah,
breaker, your radio's working
my
fine.
My dad's handle was jazz.
I think it's less. There's less of that now, and maybe it's a loss. Victor, do you want to talk to any other about your background with any of this?
It's not much. I mean, growing up, we had shortwave radios, the kind of tabletop versions that were AM, FM, and then there was the shortwave selector switch, and then you could scan through the dial that way. Growing up in, a more or less urban environment with lots of TV stations and radio stations, there wasn't really much use for shortwave. And I don't know that with all the, noise that I could really pick up anything. But I mean, some of the radios I still have, shortwave bands on them. I just, I haven't really used it. And then just lately getting into the GMRS radios just for fun, just as backup communications too. Before our one of our younger kids had a cell phone, if he would go on bike rides, I'd make sure he had one of our radios with him. And then if I was walking and following behind him, I could check in with him and make sure he got to the park and that sort of thing as well, being a helicopter parent there.
Friend of the show, Jeff Geerling, also on his YouTube channel has talked about other kinds of radio that are out there now. There's a new digital mesh radio system that some people are doing that's more popular in urban areas where there's more of that. We're not going to really talk much about that here, but there are other kinds of and newer kinds of radio out there. But we're just going to talk a little bit about the classic radio, shortwave and radio stuff this time. And to kind of define it again, shortwave radio, it's long distance radio that uses the shortwave frequencies that basically they propagate, they go far by bouncing signals off the ionosphere, off the atmosphere. It's different from AM and FM. FM is very local. It's very long radio waves, so therefore it's very local. AM can go pretty far, especially at night. At night, the radio signals travel further or can travel further. I'm from Boston. I remember being in Ohio for school and listening to AM 1030 WBZ in Boston, catching the Sox games or the Celtics games, while I was in school over the radio. At night. And that was 80,000 watts of power. It was they're these massive transmitters. But so that's different from shortwave, which, doesn't use that amount of power, but can really go across the globe, around the internet, around the world. It's the original internet, where you're getting global information from all over, but broadcast through the air. So it's like global radio without the internet or satellite, basically. I think let's talk a little bit about why. We kind of got a little bit into it, but why would one want to listen to shortwave radio today? Let's talk about the receive portion of this, though. Like your dad, father, listening to radio stations from around the world, or what kind of things we listen to. What are we doing this for? What do we get out of it?
Yeah, I think it's the exposure of different culture. With the internet, you seem to kind of maybe drag a little this away, but yeah, the exposure to different culture. When my dad listened to it, he was always a music fan, and so to listen to music from different areas of the world was really neat for him. So there's a lot of different ways of doing that, and then I don't know, it's just kind of cool that you're getting stations from Russia or Japan or whatever. I mean,
yeah, I feel like it's different than listening to a radio station over the internet, or even we'll talk about that when we get to the picks of the week, but listening to recorded music or YouTube videos from another country, that's different from hearing something live broadcast from somewhere else, there's an immediacy to it, a connection that I just don't, and maybe it's because I'm a Gen Xer and I'm not a digital native, but it just feels different. So I get it's a different feel to connect with people from around the world in that way, to kind of like this random radio station in the middle of Africa, just talking about their local news, hearing their local ads, that sort of stuff is different. Talking on their local talk radio about their local issues, it connects different. So I really like that. How about you, Victor? What do you think, is the appeal?
Yeah, I think it is just, having that experience of listening to something that's far away. I think that's been lessened certainly with the internet and, the immediacy of, you can just go on any app and immediately hear viewpoints from everywhere in the world. But growing up, that certainly wasn't the case. You had your 3 networks and your, 4 or 5 local radio stations, and, just being able to, and everybody, sounded the same on the radio
right
back then, right? Just hearing people talking in a different language or with different accents and talking about things that had really you had no frame of reference for understanding. I think it was just a really cool experience.
This is the BBC World Service, it was just like, and they spoke English, but even the way they approached the news was different, and you get a different perspective. And that's one of the reasons why I like to look at the BBC website for news, for instance. There was something interesting about that. And then there's also the possibility of, say, pirate radio stations that were local. That was another thing that was bigger in the past than it is today. The unlicensed, low power local radio, who were one of the, when radio was bigger, more powerful than it is now. People would try to, get their unlicensed local pirate radio stations online.
The other big thing is that in emergencies, right? So when there's a zombie apocalypse that happens and I have my shortwave radio, I'm going to be able to get the news of the zombie apocalypse with those low powered stations being able to broadcast off their generators,
right,
without having to have an internet connection.
Right. I've got an emergency radio here that's hand cranked. We've talked about this one before when we talked about emergency stuff, and it can pull in regular radio, but it can also pull in like National Weather Service and other emergency bands. So that's kind of like that. But yeah, and that's one of the benefits with having a ham radio is you can also communicate back and forth. You see that in all these apocalyptic movies, right? Where they're sitting there and they're trying to get, is there anybody out there? Those are ham radios, that people are talking on. So yeah, that's another good use. One thing that came up on Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World a long time ago, way back, I forget which episode it was, numbers stations. These are relics of the Cold War, and there's a lot of theories of what they are, but the main theory seems to be that there are ways for most of the Soviets, but others as well probably, to communicate with spies. And these number stations would communicate someone reading a string of numbers. They were different kinds, but in general, you could like one prime example is someone repeating strings of numbers, and it's presumed that somewhere in that string of numbers was a code that was being broadcast, and spies would listen to this particular channel in order to get whatever message is being sent to them by their handlers. The very, very James Bondian, very The Americans sort of thing.
And I can swear I heard this growing up. I have very vivid memories of listening to number stations. They may just be, fabricated memories at this point. I don't know that I actually did, but I could swear that growing up, I was able to tune into some of these, but who knows if I actually did.
Yeah, they had fun names like the Lincolnshire Poacher and the Woodpecker, and that was mainly because they often had tones that would play in between the sets of numbers.
The only knowledge I have is of my dad telling stories about that during Cold War era, that when he would do his shortwave radio, that he'd pick some of those numbers off. And he was a math nerd, so I'm guessing he tried to crack them. So
Nice. Yeah, I think a lot of people tried the cryptographic approach to try to decode them. So what do you need to get started if you want to start getting involved in shortwave radio? What kind of gear do you need, for instance? So portable radios, right?
Yeah. And so here I may not have understood the assignment, and I was just talking about amateur radios in general. You can get started with those, family radio service, or if you pay the $35 and get your GMRS license, even up to, I think, 40 or 50 watt GMRS radios. Those are good for communicating with, people if you want to listen to amateur radios, you'll need something with, more bands, more access to greater range of the frequency spectrum, because the GMRS radios are locked into the, relatively narrow bandwidth of the FRS and GMRS, where they have that where the FCC has that carved out. And you can get handheld, not very powerful, but you can get handheld, ham radios basically for under $20 on Amazon. And the one that has kind of been the king of cheap for many years is the Baofeng UV5R. And those are usually under $20, but you can get them with, with bigger batteries or bigger antennas. Again, these are, ham radios, so you do need to be licensed to use them or specifically to broadcast on them. If you're just listening and never ever hit the talk button, you're probably okay. And there's, most handheld GMRS radios also have access to the weather stations, but there are, designated frequencies on the ham radio spectrum that they use for storm chasing and other things. And so you could potentially listen to those. But like I said, you are, unless you're licensed, forbidden from broadcasting on those radios. There is a carve out, however, where if there is a, danger to personal safety or property, and there's no other means of communication because cell phones are down, and you do have, a ham radio or an amateur, one of these handheld units that's capable of transmitting, in that limited circumstance, the FCC does allow you to transmit for the purpose of, coordinating during an emergency. So most people, if you're not licensed and you're buying a ham radio, you're expecting there to be some sort of, grid down, emergency that takes down communications, and you need to talk to, your mom that lives 2 miles away or whatever. But
yep. The Baofeng UV 5R, that's a transceiver, so it transmits and receives, and you can use it only in a receive capacity, like you mentioned. But if you just want to listen to shortwave radio from around the world, I'll put a link in the show notes. Amazon has tons of inexpensive shortwave radios. Some are, like I mentioned, emergency radios, hand crank and solar and that sort of thing. And others are just regular, designed to listen to whatever the shortwave bands are. Give a look at it, look at the reviews and see, I don't, again, I'm not an expert in this per se, but I do know that some access more of the bands than others do. So, and that's probably going to be a function of the price. So the higher priced ones will be able to access more of the bands, which means more stations around the world.
Yeah. Most of these aren't going to be, they're just going to be towards the shortwave. They're not going to be as much towards those ham bands.
Right. So yeah, I'll have a couple links to some websites to give you some reviews and guides to the different equipment. We're not going to get into the individuals. I'm not going to pretend I know what the different ones are. But there's also software radios, which is a whole nother category out there, where it's basically a little piece of hardware that you plug into your computer. So it's a radio receiver that you plug in your computer, and you use software in your computer to tune it in. So that's a whole nother area as well. Someday we could get into the weeds on these various things, but for now that's a pretty overview of those.
On episode 271, one of my picks of the week was the C Crane Skywave portable radio. And I inherited this from my dad. It's a great radio and really portable in size. I'm wanting to say $50 range or somewhere around there.
Okay. And then antennas is a whole nother area. I mentioned my cousin having the giant antenna in his yard. It was like 30 feet tall. It was like crazy. You know, that's for hams who want to, broadcast around the world. But you can get smaller antennas, antennas that hang in your room. You can get an antenna that goes on your roof, that sort of thing. So there's all kinds of different antennas. But in general, a lot of the ones we're talking about, the basic ones that are on Amazon, will not really need antennas for most uses.
I misspoke that it was $100 radio.
Okay. So tips and etiquette for using, shortwave radio. Like, again, though, don't broadcast unless you have permission to. You have the required license to, but anyone can listen. If it's being broadcast over the air, that's in the clear. Anyone can listen to it. So, any other things, tips and etiquette? One thing that I saw online in a few places was about keeping a logbook, and that's really more of a tip of, it's not like required, but it's a nice way to kind of keep track of the things you've heard and when you heard them and that sort of thing. And you can kind of look back on it and say, oh yeah, I heard, these we keep saying Russian. We heard some Albanian guys talking online. Whatever it happens to be, and what you heard, and what radio stations it was, and did they identify themselves, and that it's interesting to keep a logbook, and it becomes part of the hobby, and that's part of it as well.
One of the reasons for the logbook is at different times of the day, you're going to have better access to different areas of the world because of the wave skipping through the atmosphere, right?
In the day-night.
Based on different factors of the world, you're going to see different things happening there.
Okay. And I did see reference to some software for logbooks. There was an Android app, but it looked a little out of date, so I wasn't sure if I didn't want to link to it because I wasn't sure if it was still being actively developed. But this it doesn't have to be a literal book. But that's a good point. Like keeping track of when's a good time to listen to this station, et cetera, time of the year will change, that sort of thing. You mentioned listening quietly, as in don't transmit unless you're licensed. We'll have a link to the licensing information at the FCC website. That'll be in the show notes.
I think one last note is most local communities, if you live in an urban area, you're going to have ham radio clubs, and the people there are usually hobbyists who love to teach new hobbyists. And so if you want to really dive into it, that's probably the best way to do it, is to get involved with a community of a ham radio. Usually they have a membership fee, like $10 a year or something tiny. Yeah,
these are people who want people to join them. They don't want to keep them out for exorbitant fees. Excellent. So,
and if you haven't seen the movie called Frequency, starring Dennis Quaid and Jim Caviezel, make sure you check that out. It's a good ham radio movie.
That is a good radio movie. It's traveling through time, or maybe. So, common question. I came across a list of common questions you can find people ask online is, can I get in trouble for listening? And like I said, you can't get in trouble for anything that's listening to anything that's broadcast.
If you live in the United States.
Yes.
It is true that you could get in trouble if you lived in China or North Korea or something.
That's true.
So if we have listeners from other areas, yes, they can
probably
get in trouble
for listening to this.
Yeah, they probably get in trouble for listening to a Catholic podcast, but
Yeah, but you're right. Again, we're addressing mostly a North American, an American, United States context. Kids can get into it. It would be great to get kids into it. It's a cool hobby, and it combines, electronics and technology, but also, just the world, geography. It's sort of like what I saw one reference. It's like radio geocaching, where you're kind of collecting locations. So it can be really cool for kids. Another question was, how do I know what I'm hearing? And I wasn't sure whether that was, yeah, that might be a language question, or it might be just a general, what is this a broad commercial? Is it what is it? But one thing I saw suggested was, look up online, look for websites that list things to listen to on Shortwave. That's a great place to start. And again, we'll have a link in the show notes to various websites you can check out with this sort of information.
If you're used to listening to internet radio or really clear FM radio too, with the how do I know what I'm hearing, sometimes you're not going to get the most clear signal, right? Sometimes you're going to only hear 30 seconds at a time, and then breaks and 30 seconds at a time, because of the nature of the signals. And so that kind of goes into the how do I know what I'm hearing too, right. Is it takes a level of patience to listen to the ins and outs of it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And like any specific topic area, it's got its own lingo, it's got its own culture, it's got its own ways of doing things, and you'll learn that over time. Joining a club will help with that very fast, like you mentioned. Ham clubs, but man, those are classics. All right, so that is our basic primer beginner's guide. Dive into shortwave radio, amateur radio, ham radio. Again, if there's interest, we can go deeper into any of these topics and probably get an expert on to talk about some of these things if you wanted some more information on these. But this is a place to begin. Send in your questions, send in any follow-ups, or if you're yourself an expert in these areas, especially if we got anything wrong, we'd love to hear it, and we'd love to correct it.
I guarantee we did.
We're going to have lots of hands on us.
Yeah, right.
Dom had a pretty good list of just different links and articles, and those will be in the show notes, I think. So,
yeah.
And with some guides in there, and I think those would be really helpful for you to look at and to see, especially list of different stations, BBC stations, things like that you can dive into.
Definitely check those out. All right. So before we move on to our headlines, I do want to stop here and take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create The Secrets of Technology, including Gabe S., James S., Darren W., Pamela F., and Christopher S. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue The Secrets of Technology and all the shows at StarQuest. And you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So, Father, our first headline actually is another thing you contributed to this episode, was this link to this Facebook post that it was titled "The Story Behind the Online Catechism at St. Charles Borromeo." Now, if you're a Catholic who's been online for any amount of time on the internet, you've probably run across the Catechism of the Catholic Church at this website for St. Charles Borromeo, and wondered, why is the catechism at this website, and why is it being allowed? And it's this great story about how years ago, when the websites were new and the catechism was new, this little parish website in literally Picayune, Mississippi, one of the parishioners got permission from the pastor to set up a website for the parish that included the catechism, and not just like, paste on there. It had great search. I remember using this, great search, all kinds of stuff. It was so good that eventually, when the Vatican was putting the catechism on its website, this was the best English language version of it, the American English version of it, that they got permission from the parish to use it on their website, on the Vatican website. So it's this great story, but it was so fun to read it.
It's a good story of, so often we expect service and people to do things for us and the church to be doing things for us. And this is just a story of a normal dude that served the entire English speaking church by taking something into his own hands. I think a parallel to this would be the people who created the breviary apps, right? Those weren't done by the church. Those were done by just laymen who wanted to be able to spread the worship of the church. And so it's a beautiful example of just being able to use your talents and your gifts to be able to share, right? This man probably didn't give millions of dollars to the church, but his impact that he had in providing this service for, I mean, it was over a decade that there wasn't a Vatican version of the site up there. And so he was providing this service. And it touched me because in my reinvigorating of my own faith and searching the catechism, this was the website I used. I thought it was some like Catholic organization or something. I had no clue it was a small parish in Mississippi, actually, until I saw this Facebook article. I'm like, this is so cool.
I thought it was St. Charles Borromeo Seminary in Philadelphia, I think it is, which would make sense, like a big institution like that. But was just 1999, 26 years ago, this guy set it up. And it reminds me of sites like CatholicHierarchy.org, which was one guy who created this incredible resource of all the bishops that we know of through the history of the Catholic Church and how they connect to each other and all the details that we know about each one. Or Kevin Knight over at newadvent.org, who he has the 1913 Catholic Encyclopedia and the Summa.
I like this story of how this is before, there was really good OCR or optical character recognition, and him, cutting pages out of a print version. And it's not a small book. And then scanning it and it just giving, it's not written in a OCR friendly or published in an OCR friendly font either. And so, him having to go through each page and manually fix every letter just about, that's
amazing.
A real labor of love.
Yeah, knowing the state of OCR 25 years ago, it might have been faster just type it in.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I think he typed a large amount of it by hand.
Yeah. Then creating a database, a searchable, like cross-linked and hyperlinked and everything. I mean, this isn't just the text. It's a searchable and connected and linked. It's fantastic. And the thing that I always wondered was, how did he do this without getting the copyright, trolls, the lawyers? Because you publish any church document today online, the USCCB is on you like crazy. I've experienced it. I had someone had sent me, when I had my blog, a draft copy of the general instruction for the Roman Missal updates. And I'm like, oh, look at these updates. I put them on the thing. I got a letter from a lawyer, like right away. Like, you cannot have this online.
Updates.
Don't get me. You're going to get me in trouble jumping on this soapbox.
Yes, let's copyright and prevent people from publishing scripture. And, the
Liturgy of the Hours is my biggest soapbox of.
Right.
And the lectionary of the Mass and the Bible. And I'm like,
why would anyone want to have that out there? I get.
May St. Jerome pray for your darn soul.
Their argument is we're protecting it from misuse, from being, put out there in bad versions that are wrong or, have error in them. But the fact is they're not doing it. They're not putting them out there, at least in good forms. And there's been long discussion about how you could do this in a way that protects it using Creative Commons licensing and all kinds of other things. But really what it comes down to is it's probably a money thing. That's what most people have concluded, is that they make too much money from publishing these documents themselves.
Again, you're going to get me in trouble with the soapbox. So I'm going to.
I will say it and keep you from getting in trouble. But the thing here with the case with this was the catechism is the copyright in English was not held by the USCCB. It was held by the Vatican. And so he sent an email and fax and a letter to the Vatican, and someone at the Vatican said, sure. No one knows who that is. I mean, maybe he's got the original letter still, but God bless him, whoever that was. I think it's great. So, it's a great story. We'll link in the show notes. You should go read it and say a prayer of thanks for, was it John Meyer was the man who responsible, and his pastor who said, it's okay to do it. Just don't get me in trouble. Which I've heard from many a pastor say about many things.
Oh, it's a great line.
Go do it. Just don't get me in trouble. All right. Our next headline comes from the U.S. Consumer Product Safety Commission. We have often been, or I have often been, and others on the show, been vocal fans of the products from Anker, including their battery packs. There is a particular Anker battery pack, the Anker PowerCore 10,000 Model A1263, that is getting a recall. You should not use it. You should contact Anker. We'll have a link in the website, in the show notes for their website of how to get in touch with them and get a replacement.
Yeah, this was sold between June of 2016 and December of 2022. If you bought it, you probably paid between like $20 and $30 for it. Right. For that specific model.
There are a few Anker power banks that look similar. They have the same rounded shape in black, but it's a very specific model. I have one that looks like this, but it turns out it's not the same power bank. At least I really hope so, because it doesn't. The one I have doesn't have a 1263 model number on it, so it looks like it's not the right thing.
Yeah, I got a notification from Anker. I probably have one of these, and I have no idea where it is.
I think this is a good reminder, though, of buying power banks and buying them from reputable companies, and not the weird Amazon 6 random letter companies. Right. It's just...
But Anker
or down at the local Circle K.
Yeah, Anker came out and said, hey, there's a problem with this one, and responded to it well. If I'm buying the whatever brand from Circle K or from eBay or Amazon, I'm not going to get a notification that it's set on fire in someone's house or whatever. Right. Don't mess around with batteries. Just don't.
Yeah. I a few years ago, I had the idea that I was going to build my own lithium-ion batteries out of recycled cells. And I mean, I have one that's probably, I don't know, like 90 cells that I have hooked up as my solar power bank that I built. It was recycled from modem power supplies, or modem, because whenever you have a cable modem, there's backup, 18650 batteries in it. And so I just bought like all these from like a reclamation thing. And I put that one together okay, and it's held up for like 5 years now, and I have had no problems with it. But I was playing around with just like spot welding, nickel strips onto something to make my own battery, and like all of a sudden it went, and I was like, oh no! And so like I don't know how I put it out so quickly, but
ATF is knocking at Victor's door now.
No, I mean it's perfectly legal to take recycled and reclaimed
firefighters
batteries.
Be knocking at your door. Like we our kids karate instructor is a firefighter, and he gave them a lecture recently on the dangers of lithium-ion batteries. He's like, I have as few of them in my home as I possibly can. I would never buy a EV, and like he was really like if when they catch on fire, you just can't put them out. They have to be
once they go. I mean, they go big. So
Victor, I'm picturing you being like, if you've watched Young Sheldon and he's in his garage doing the.
I have not, but it's a fun hobby, but I wouldn't recommend it if you're just kind of goofing off and stuff. So
only if you know what you're doing. And clearly Victor knows what he's doing. We hope.
Wear safety glasses.
Yeah,
wear safety glasses.
Asbestos suit and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So. All right, but if you have this Anker battery pack, send it back. Get a new one for free. They'll give you a new one. All right, and then our last headline is I'm sure everyone's heard about this story if you've been online at all. 16 billion passwords stolen. The ZDNet headline is, were 16 billion passwords from Apple, Google, and Facebook leaked? The short answer to that is not really. So there's been a lot of hype and fear, uncertainty, and doubt around this. yes, 16 billion passwords for in a massive cohort of data leaks, data sets out there. This one cybersecurity team has discovered 30 different exposed data sets containing from tens of millions to over 3.5 billion records each. In total, there was 16 billion records, but there's a lot of overlap in there. Some of these data sets had the same passwords and that sort of thing. This isn't new, right? We've had leaks and this sort of stuff before. So what should we do? I've seen some people, change all of your passwords. Well, if you're like me, I have something like 700 passwords. I'm not going to change all my passwords. So what can you do? You can, if you've been contacted by a website, change that password if they tell you to change it. That's the basic. What do you guys think about first? I mean, is this something to worry about, or
use two-factor authentication? Use a password manager. There's what's the website? There's Have I Been Pwned? You can check that website out and see if your email address was part of that leakage. But
we'll have links,
and then a lot of major websites now, passkeys. And then with changing passwords, things like banks do change those regularly.
Right. Your bank should probably be reminding you regularly to change it even.
Those are big ones. And then your main email address is one that you should change regularly and keep track of, because that's your main email address kind of becomes the linchpin of everything, of what you can access if someone gets access to that email address.
Yeah. Although if you're using two-factor authentication, you're safer, much safer. If you're using passkeys, you're pretty darn safe. Although sometimes passkeys are being used alongside of a password instead of a password. So that password still is a way in. So just keep that in mind. But switch to passkeys as soon as possible. Then you eliminate this whole password problem.
We might need to do a episode talking about passkeys and what that is. It's kind of a newer concept.
Yeah. Definitely use a password manager. I saw someone saying, I have unique passwords at all my websites, but I don't use the password manager because I don't need to. Yeah, that means you're using a pattern, probably.
Yep.
And patterns, computers are really good at those. What was the other change? Yeah, the whole Apple's passwords getting breached. Apple uses multi-factor authentication on it, so it's unlikely unless someone tricks you into giving them, which someone tried to do to me once, tricks you into giving them the code that pops up on your phone or your iPad, your Mac, to unlock things. They're not going to be able to get in. So don't ever give those codes out to anyone who calls you, or even you call them. They should never ask for it.
I was appreciative of, about a month ago, I had to get new tires, all 4 new tires on my car. And so it was a larger purchase, and I ran my card and it declined it right away, which embarrasses you a little bit. And my phone vibrates, and it's the app for the bank asking me to approve the purchase and to send the card through again. So these security things, especially when it gets to us having cell phones and the apps, are getting a lot more secure. So
it's scary in some ways that how much your phone is becoming the center of your security, and how important it is to keep that secure. That's very true. So should you run around like your hair's on fire? No. Should you be cautious? Yes. Should we always be cautious? Definitely. So just use a password manager, use two-factor authentication, use passkeys. All right, so those are our headlines. Let's move on to our picks of the week. Father, you're up first. What's your pick this week?
My pick stays on subject with what we're doing right now, and it's a website called Radio Garden. And this takes the internet streams or radio stations from around the entire world, comes up with a globe, and you can kind of click around, or you can go into a search engine type thing in it and pull up most radio stations. I looked in my local area, and probably 60% of them have, it's based on them having radio feeds that are under certain protocols and not ran under apps and open transmission and things like that. But especially when we're getting to talk about foreign radio stations and that, I didn't dive too much to see if any of those are shortwave stations. I'm guessing there's a lot of crossover. But it's a fun little website. You can go in hot air balloon mode and kind of just click around as you fly around the globe, and click different stations. And so it's,
my understanding is it's all live terrestrial radio, like regular AM, FM radio. Yeah, being broadcast around on the internet, which is really cool.
It's an incredible site. I think it's more friendly than TuneIn. There is some advertising and pop-ups on it that is a little annoying, but turn on a good ad blocker and you'll be fine.
What I love about this is, and as I was telling you guys before, we discovered this in my family a few years ago, is like, again, like I said, I think I mentioned, like the ability to listen to local radio, hear local news, local ads, just to really feel a connection to people locally. Now, a lot of these are going to be in other languages, so unless you speak Spanish or Portuguese or whatever language it is, it'll be harder to get. But like, there are a lot of English-speaking countries where they have English-speaking radio anyway, where they are, and like listening to Irish radio or English radio or that sort of stuff. It can be a lot of fun, and you get a real sense of it. I've
pulled up like Radio Israel in the last couple weeks of everything going on. And sometimes you get English in there, especially when they're giving emergency warnings. They'll usually do it in multiple languages. So it's been kind of neat to, and kind of sad at the same time to hear those things on local, Israel radio.
The, even like lots of like even Africa, there are a lot of countries that were former English colonies or former British colonies where you'll have some radio stations are in English, that sort of thing. I remember listening to one in Kenya not long ago. So it can be really fun. That's a good pick. I think it's fun to sit around with your kids and explore the world like that. Excellent. So, Victor, you're up next. What is your pick this week?
My pick this week is the Nintendo Switch 2, which I was fortunate to be able to pick up earlier this month, and it is a lot of fun. And that's my review of Nintendo Switch 2. It's definitely an upgrade over the first Switch. The screen is huge. It looks great. The new Mario Kart World game is outstanding. Cool. If you're a fan of Mario Kart, it's basically they created this entire world map that you're free to drive around in a free roam mode. But the courses, instead of being locked into a racetrack, and there are racetracks on the map, some of the races you're doing laps around a racetrack. Some of the races you're driving from one racetrack, to another. There's lots of different fun modes. So that's been exciting. We've been playing the Hogwarts Legacy game on it, and that looks great as well. No Man's Sky was updated with the Switch 2 version. That also looks great. It was a free, if you own the Switch 1 version, it was a free upgrade to the Switch 2 version, and it looks and plays better. One thing I wasn't really expecting was that even Switch 1 games, some of them which haven't been updated for Switch 2, just run and play a lot better on the Switch 2. So some of the older games you have that were kind of sluggish on the Switch may play better on the Switch 2. So it's definitely a lot of fun, and so I've been spending my kids have been spending a lot of time with that, and I've been kind of sneaking in to play it when I can.
When you can sneak it away from them.
Yeah.
That's cool. Excellent. I've got the Switch 1. I don't know. Someday, maybe Switch 2, but not anytime soon. I've only had the Switch 1 for a year or so. So my kids are still enamored of it. but man, it would be fun to play Mario Kart World.
Keep them happy while you can.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Excellent. Good pick. So my pick is another little Mac app that I find indispensable. It's called Moom, and it's from Manytrick Software. And basically it lets you manage and control Windows easily. So in its most basic form, it kind of takes over the functionality of the stoplight controls, window controls in the top left, the red, yellow, green ones. When you hover over the green stoplight, it pops down a little window, and you can resize your window from there based on how many squares you want it to be, or you can move it. I want it to be in the upper left quarter, lower right quarter, right side of the screen. But what's even better is you can program it. You can set up key commands to do very specific things, like move certain windows. Like, for example, if you have a certain setup, like for podcasting, I have my windows in a very specific way on my screens. I can do a key command and all the windows go where they should go. Another thing is I can use key commands to move windows. I can move this one to the right side of the screen, move it to another monitor, all that sort of stuff. And eventually it just becomes second nature. And I don't even know what the key commands are now. They're just memorized in my fingertips.
Now,
yeah,
I'm in Sequoia right now. And if I just hover over that green arrow right now, it looks like it already has built-in function like that.
It has some built-in function, but
it's not exact, but it gives some of those basic tiling features,
right,
native in Sequoia. I used to use, I think it was Magnet was the app I used.
Right, I remember Magnet. That was a predecessor, or something like this that was before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Apple has added a little of these controls. I find Moom to like a lot of these things. Apple does the basic version, and then these developers they do the ones that have a lot more power user features, more I was going to say picayune, get it in my brain now. More fine-grained features, power user features to control things. Like they don't have the thing where you can have setups where you can have all your apps go to a different place. That sort of thing. So
Windows 11 has this, so we don't get accused of being a Mac show. Windows 11 has a good built-in feature of tiling, and your Linux as well. If you're a Linux user, you can figure tiling out for yourself.
Because you're a Linux user. So that's my pick anyway. So Moom, I've been using it for years. It's recently been upgraded to 4.0. It's a great piece of software.
$15 is what it looks like.
Yeah, at a great price.
It's not a set app.
All right. No, it's not in setup. No, I don't think it is. I'm trying to. Now we have to look and see, close the loop on that before we go. But I'm pretty sure it's not in setup. Moom is not in setup.
Okay.
So hey, we should have a drinking game when I pick things that aren't in setup.
Yeah.
Victor's Switch versus Dom on setup.
Yeah. Exactly.
Man, this one we got the listeners drunk now. All right, so that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you thought of any part of our discussion, which you can do by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/technology, the StarQuest Facebook page, facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send an email to technology@sqpn.com. Visit the StarQuest Discord community at sqpn.com/Discord. You'll find links from our discussion and our picks of the week on our show notes at starquest.fm/TEC304, or just go to the StarQuest website and see it there. Be sure to follow The Secrets of Tech in Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where you should hit the bell to get notifications. Until next time, Victor Lambs, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of technology.
Thanks, Dom.
And Father Joseph Sun, thank you as well.
Absolutely.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to The Secrets of Technology on StarQuest. Here's another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy. The Secrets of Sacred Art. Find it wherever fine podcasts are found or at starquest.fm/art.